I'm pleased to introduce Elaine S. Povich to Politics and Prose. Povich is an award-winning Washington journalist and author of 3 books, including John McCain, a biography. She has reported from Washington for UPI, the Chicago Tribune, Newsday, and currently Stateline. Her new book, John McCain, American Maverick, is a lavishly illustrated volume that provides a compelling look at the life and career of Senator John McCain from his early years to today. Featuring more than 145 photographs, it covers multiple episodes of his life, including his childhood, his service in Vietnam and harrowing imprisonment in a POW camp, his presidential campaigns, and perhaps most importantly, his current role as the elder statesman who stands up for his country. Ken Burns, producer and director of numerous documentary films, writes, John McCain is without a doubt a genuine American hero, complicated, brave, flawed, sacrificing, confounding, inspiring, and above all, human. This book will enumerate the myriad acts and accomplishments of this great man. Now please join me in welcoming Elaine Povich.
Thank you so very much for that lovely introduction. It's really a thrill to be here today. I am going to talk a little bit about what is included in John McCain, American Maverick, and talk a lot about the photographs, because while I love to think of myself as a great writer, this book is actually about the pictures. And if you have a chance to look at it, you will see that some of these photographs, even the most experienced journalists in the room, of which I know there are many, may not have seen some of these pictures of John McCain as he went through his life. I know that putting this book together was a real thrill. I'm thrilled to see a lot of friends and family in the audience. Thanks. It makes this much easier. I have to say that one of the things that I always enjoyed about being around John McCain, and it's particularly resonant today, is his feelings about the press. Didn't always love us, but he sort of respected and thought about how he was going to be treated by the media, and viewed us many times as a necessary evil. Very often talked about how we were refugees from a work release program. And he thought that that was a wonderful way to describe the members of the media. Always got a laugh, and I see it still does today. That's encouraging. And sometimes he referred to us as my base, which was not at all outlandish, considering in many of his runs for office, he was not considered the favorite, was not the favorite of the party, was not the favorite of a lot of voters, but he always had the media. Now, I would say not always. There was a very testy relationship with the Arizona Republic, who had covered him from the very beginning, and particularly when his wife, Cindy McCain, got in some serious legal and personal trouble by using drugs that didn't belong to her and stealing them and becoming an addict. But he never really got thrilled with the Arizona Republic's coverage, but he never thought about the coverage as anything but that's the way it is, and that's what the media does, and that's what we all do. So it was nice to have somebody who could run around the country and talk about the press in a way that was funny and respectful, and a lot of fun for us who were covering him. I'm going to show some of the pictures that are in this book. We're going to talk a little bit about what they all mean. Obviously, this is just a small sample of the photographs that are in this book. What we have here, as you can see, is what I like to call one hell of a ride. He always sort of thought of his life this way. And, given his current very serious health issues, I think he still thinks about his life as being one hell of a ride. He had a great ride. And even if it ends in the near future, which of course, none of us is hoping for, but we know what reality is with the disease he has, he would say to you, I've had one hell of a ride. Notice in this picture, if you will, the little wristband that he's got on right here. There will be some other pictures throughout this presentation that will show you that little bracelet. That bracelet was given to him by a woman in Claremont, New Hampshire named Lynn Savage. She wore that bracelet because of her son who died in Iraq. her son was Matthew Stanley. Now, John McCain had known about POW bracelets because people had worn his name around their wrist when he was a prisoner and had worn Vietnam-era bracelets for those who had also died in combat. And he knew all about that. So when this woman came to him at a town hall in New Hampshire and asked him to wear that bracelet, he said he would. And he wore it for the rest of his life. There are places in this picture show that you will see that have more pictures of him, and I'll try to point out where the bracelet is. It wasn't the kind of thing where he took it from the woman, put it on his arm, and then gave it to some aide or whatever afterwards. He continued to wear it. And I think that shows you something of the measure of the man. You can disagree with him, and a lot of people do, but there is something interesting about how he regards honor. You know, he came from a Navy family. And here they are. We have his father, John Sidney McCain, the elder, who was known as Slew. That's his grandfather. This is his dad, also junior, known as Jack. Mom, Roberta, who we will see in some later pictures, who is now, I think, 106, but I could be off a year or two. And his sister, Sandy. Brother Joe, and of course there's little Johnny. He was born into a Navy family, as you know, and he was basically born to the life that he was going to have. It was preordained by his father and his grandfather that he would join the Navy and, presumably become an admiral, just like they had. He wasn't exactly thrilled with the fact that his life had been sort of preordained for him ahead of time, as you can imagine most young people would not. But he did the best he could. He went to Episcopal High School, where he played football. Number 44 right there. Played rather badly, actually. Was not much of an athlete. He was a better wrestler. Maybe that's because he got into a lot of fights when he was a young boy. He was rebelling against this Navy history that had been thrust upon him. He didn't want to be that guy. He wanted to be his own guy. And that his own guy rebelled in the way that he could figure out. He got into a lot of fights. And he broke, as his former headmaster at Episcopal said, he broke every rule in the book. And he somehow managed to get away with it. Now, if you think about the twinkle in his eye that is John McCain today, you think about how he really enjoys breaking rules. And that started when he was a young chap not playing football very well at Episcopal High School. Of course, he went to the Naval Academy. That was his life. That's what he was told he had to do. He went to the Naval Academy, and he didn't adhere to the rules much there either. His shoes were never shined. His shirt tail hung out. He got more demerits than he could possibly ever imagine. He had so many demerits that one time when he and his roommates sneaked a television set into their dorm room, which was against the rules, they played a game like rock, paper, scissors. It was called a shake around to determine who would take the demerits for the illegal television set. And he was so close, he was this close to getting thrown out, that his bunkmates determined that he would not have to participate in the game, that he could stand aside and some other midshipman would take the fall for the television set. I gotta tell you, I think that set was all him, but nobody ever said it otherwise. Among his great quotes about moms and dads, he was the son and son of admirals. That's the first line in my biography, but I am my mother's son. And of course he is. And as his family moved around the country and the world, the life of a Navy admiral, he looked to mom as the on-site parent because dads were off fighting wars. As a matter of fact, one of the lines in his biography is, the first time I remember my father, he went off to fight a war. And it was Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th. Somebody came by, picked him up, and he was gone for 3.5 years. Never, because there was a war on. So mom had a big influence in his life. She was the one who had to discipline him. Now, if you can imagine, this guy, the guy who snuck the TV set into the dorm room, the guy who never polished his shoes, the guy whose shirt tail was hanging out, who was this close to getting thrown out of he was a handful. His sister, being the first child, she was the easy one. His little brother, Joey, he got along just fine. Johnny was a handful. And they used to drive around the country from place to place, from station to station, and she would reach back into the back seat with what was ever handy and throw it at him. Sometimes it was a full soda to try to get him to behave. Not an easy task. I will fast forward a little bit through some of the Vietnam years and the POW history, because that story of John McCain is extremely well known. And everyone knows about his getting shot down over Vietnam and spending 5.5 years in a POW camp. And when he came home, as you can see him looking out the bus right now, you probably can't see it because the picture's a little small. He's missing a bunch of teeth. So if you look at that picture and you see that smile, that is not the smile you see today. And you know, and you don't have to wonder how those teeth got knocked out. When he came home, he tried to become back in the Navy and to do his job, but he was a little bit infatuated with the press even then. One of the first interviews he gave was to U.S. News and World Report. And this is a picture of a first-person story he was telling to U.S. News. You can look it up. It's, I believe, in I have to think about what it is, but it's a long time ago. Google it. Very interesting interview, quite savvy. But if you look at the eyes, that's a face that's gone through a lot. And you'll notice the cup of coffee and cigarettes. Cigarettes were the coin of the realm in prison, and everybody smoked when you could get them because that was the way they rewarded people and also punished people. He tried to get on with his life. He was married and had 3 children when he came home. It didn't work out, and he says it was not because of Vietnam, although many of the veterans of that war, particularly those who were in POW camps, found themselves in very difficult marriages because of the separation. But Carol, his wife, right there, his first wife, nobody talks much about her. She won't say a bad word about him. A lot of other people have, because by his own admission, he ran around. He got home, he went crazy a little bit. You can chalk it up to whatever psychological ideas you might think about why somebody would do that, but he did it. And he wanted to grab life with both hands, and she wasn't part of it. But she won't say a bad word about him. In fact, I saw an interview with her recently in which, honestly, it looked like she's still a little bit in love with him. Even after all of that, he has this way about it. It was pretty interesting. Now, we're going to get to the fun part of this story with him becoming the senator from Arizona. First, he ran for the House. He met and fell in love with Cindy Hensley and moved to Arizona. And everybody said he was a carpetbagger. Moved to Arizona. We're going to run for office. Never lived here. You never lived here. You never lived here. You're somewhere else. You're from away. You're no good. And one night, he'd about had it with the carpetbagger charge. And he looked at the guy in the eye and he said, you know, I'm from a Navy family. We've lived all over the country. That's what happens when you join the Navy. He said, as a matter of fact, the longest place I ever spent in one place was Hanoi. That was the end of that. And he ran for office from there. You can see him in one of his favorite states. That's him campaigning in New Hampshire. He loves New Hampshire. He thinks it's a great old place. And I was just up there doing one of these book talks up there, and they haven't forgotten him. That audience was amazing because the people in that audience had either met him, knew him, or had come to his house 3 or 4 times to find out whether they liked him or not. So in that room, most of the people knew more about him than I did. That's all I can tell you. Here he is campaigning in 2000. Now, look how young those little kids are. Aren't they cute? That's Megan. She was a young teenager at the time. And he campaigned, but unfortunately in 2000 he lost. a fact that gets lost itself, I think, in a lot of our memories of him. His campaign was not successful. And it didn't last very long, really, from the end of 1999 to March of 2000. This is him in Arizona withdrawing from the race. A lot of reporters in that crowd. That's Elizabeth Arnold from NPR. And that's me. That's all you can see of me is the hair. But it's a little longer back then. But he went back to Arizona. And then, once you are bitten by the presidential bug, it doesn't take long before you want to go back to New Hampshire. So there he is in 2008. Cindy does not look at all happy about being in New Hampshire. You notice she's a little cold. He, on the other hand, jacket, top coat, he's just fine. He loved to campaign with people, and he kind of liked kids. He absolutely adores children. And the story of how he adopted Bridget from Bangladesh is also well known. Cindy was over there on a aid mission to the orphanages in Bangladesh, and she came home with 2 infants and had one in her hand when McCain met her at the plane. And he said to her, "And where is this little one going to live?" And she said, "In our house." And he took her in. And so that's how they got their 4th child. He has a big thing about kids. He also likes people, likes to campaign with a lot of folks. There he is at a general store in New Hampshire. Then we come to Sarah Palin. What should I say about Sarah? Anybody got any ideas? No, it has to be clean. I was at the convention when Sarah Palin was chosen as the vice presidential candidate, and I have to tell you, he originally wanted Joe Lieberman as his vice presidential candidate, thought it would be a great idea, cross party lines. Lieberman by that time was an independent, and everybody thought that would be a great idea. They'd have this, wonderful ticket with independents and former Democrats and whatever, and his aides went to him and essentially said in so many words, "Are you nuts? This convention will blow up if we nominate a former Democrat independent on this ticket. There's no way." So Sarah was second choice, and he decided to select her. Now, I have to tell you, as far as being at that convention, in that room at that time, everybody thought Sarah Palin was fabulous. I was sitting in the Minnesota delegation, the Minnesota nice people. They were jumping up and down. That lasted until they hit the road. And the reporters and everybody else, including Mr. McCain, discovered that she didn't know anything. And that she was going to be a problem. So when we were putting this book together, the publisher asked me, they wanted to do a whole section on the McCain and the campaign, and they asked me, "Can you please write a couple of funny anecdotes about how McCain and Palin got along on the campaign trail?" And I said no, because there weren't any. They did not get along. Now, he refuses to say it was a mistake, but lately he's been saying things like, "I should have gone with my first choice. I should have stayed with Lieberman," sort of dissing by faint praise. And then we get to another woman in his life, Miss Hillary. They get along, actually. They get along great. And there is an infamous story of the two of them drinking vodka on a trip that the congressional delegation took to someplace in Eastern Europe. I forget where it was exactly. And the word is that they were drinking shots and that she drank him under the table. That's what it says. Asked about that recently, Mr. McCain allows as to how that's all Lindsey Graham's fault. He told that story. He didn't exactly make it up, but as McCain puts it, Lindsey likes to tell a good story. But they did get along. In his job, you get to meet lots of fun people. There he is with Prince Harry, showing him around the Capitol and trying to figure out what's going on there. And here he is at the State of the Union with Chuck Schumer and the aforementioned Lindsey Graham. The green ribbons, this was 2013, the green ribbons are for Sandy Hook. Seems like we haven't come too far, have we? That's all I'll say about that. I will tell you to notice how he's pointing with his hands like this. If you ever see photos of him in the campaign pose where everybody's arms are up like this and it's great victory, his are here. They don't go any higher. One of the things that was left over from the injuries he suffered in Vietnam that he does not talk about, and you would never know unless you know, is that he can't lift his arms above his shoulders. And he can't really comb his hair. He would never tell you. I just did. The Senate is where he has fun. There he is with Teddy and the aforementioned Joe Lieberman, and also Jack Warner, who was a senator from Virginia, but also Secretary of the Navy. And they got along very, very well. He worked with Ted Kennedy. It is beyond ironic that the same brain cancer that took Ted Kennedy is also what he is suffering from now. It is beyond ironic. But that it is. He really loved working in the Senate, and the speech he gave fairly recently before he went home for treatment about how the Senate has become dysfunctional, I believe is what he really thinks about it. Kind of love the place, like to work there. It's changed a lot, even since that time. There he is at home, and you can see all of the pictures of a life that he was walking through. I think that he enjoys every moment that he can of the life. And I want to read just a small passage or two from the book, and then I'm going to open it up for questions from all of you. So be thinking of some good ones. You know, as reporters, we really like being on the other side of the question and answer period, being the ones who ask the questions, please, as opposed to answering them. But I am more than happy to answer some questions. As I said, the mics are here and there. Think up something fun for me to talk about. I'm going to talk a little bit about a fire that he survived on the USS Forrestal in 1967. It was a devastating fire. It was an aircraft carrier, and a bunch of bombs were what they call cooked off, which basically meant there was an errant spark on deck, and the bombs started exploding and igniting fires on deck. It was a terrible thing. He was in an airplane at the time and dropped out of the airplane and went running across the deck. He was not badly injured, but a lot of other people were. What he learned from that experience was that the bombs he was dropping over Vietnam had real tolls on human flesh, and it set him to thinking, but the missions continued. After that fire, a chance meeting with the New York Times legendary reporter Johnny Apple brought him some unscheduled R&R. They essentially booked off the aircraft carrier, I don't know how, went to Thailand, God knows how, and a chance to see the Vietnam War through a journalist's eyes. The two found they liked each other despite their different viewpoints. Throughout his political life, McCain enjoyed jousting with journalists. In the presidential campaign of 2000, McCain often referred to the reporters on his Straight Talk Express as my base, which had more than a grain of truth to it, as he was shut out by many in his own party who were backing George W. Bush in the primaries, and he didn't have enough money to buy a lot of ads. He relied on free media, and the reporters, for their part, relied on his freewheeling comments for a lot of good copy. He also referred to reporters as inmates on a work release program, which always got a laugh from his audience and a chuckle from the media members themselves. Sometimes McCain would seek out reporters rather than talk to the staff on his bus. He would wander to the back, coffee cup or diet soda in his hand, depending on what time of day it was, coffee for the morning, Diet Coke for the afternoon, and essentially play Ask Me Anything. He would respond to campaign questions and non-campaign questions. What's your favorite movie? Viva Zapata. If you haven't watched it, it's a kicker. It got so bad that some reporters said they could never get him to stop talking, even when they needed to write or sleep. One late evening, fighting Friday rush hour traffic out of Manhattan bound for Connecticut, he engaged in a country-by-country assessment of the newly independent Soviet republics with Lars Erik Nelson, the late columnist for the New York Daily News. The rest of the reporters could only gape at the depth of his knowledge of what were then obscure countries. His camaraderie was not only for reporters, he had a genuine love for people. He had trouble firing anyone on his staff, even if they deserved it, usually leaving that distasteful duty to others. He campaigns in high gear, walked fast, talked fast, took pictures fast, trying to corral as many people into his circle as possible. Maybe the man in a hurry style was a way to continue to make up for the 5.5 years he had lost to a prisoner of war camp in Vietnam. Maybe it stemmed from trying to keep pace with his accomplished father and grandfather. Maybe it was just his way of operating. He never seemed as content as when he was quickly absorbing a topic, tailoring it to his style, and speaking about it soon thereafter. Yet he was sometimes mercurial and testy. He could get angry at something he found distasteful and lash out, but the tempest usually blew over quickly. He called people jerks, or worse, but usually with affection. A wicked sense of humor keeps him real about himself. His response to questions about his age and numerous physical impairments is another often used line. I'm older than dirt and I have more scars than Frankenstein. But he has an iron constitution and the ability to be completely refreshed after a cat nap on an airplane. Above it all is his honor, the code by which he has always lived. The worst times of his life were when he felt that honor tarnished, yet they were rare. McCain tries to do what he feels is right. He doesn't always succeed, but surely he has a hell of a good time trying. Thanks very much. I am happy to take anybody's questions about anything having to do with anything or John McCain in specific. So please. Hey. Oh, Slew? I honestly don't. You know what? You've stumped me right off the bat. I'm going to find out. I appreciate that. It is. Thank you, though. That's great. Okay. Does anybody have one I can answer? Marla, go to the microphone, please.
Sure. Hi, Elaine.
Hi, Marla.
I was just curious, is he close with his kids? Does he have grandkids? Because it seems like the kids came from his first wife, except that he has an adopted child with Cindy.
He has 7, actually.
So he has a lot of kids.
It's a story. 2 were from Carol. They were hers, and he adopted them when he married her. They had 1 together, a girl, Sydney. He has Jack, Jimmy, and Megan, who you know from TV, and then Bridget. So he has 7 children. And yes, they all get along, and Jack recently attended the Naval Academy. John Sidney McCain, the 4th. And yes, he does have grandchildren as well.
So he does have that legacy. The Naval Academy legacy lives on.
Yeah, there's actually one picture in the book of President Obama with Jack McCain at the Naval Academy on his graduation. It's a nice shot. And interestingly, not only does he get along with his first wife, one of his children from his first marriage, one of the 2 he adopted, I can't remember if it's Doug or Andy. I think it's Andy. Works for Cindy Hensley McCain's beer company. The Hensley family has the largest Budweiser dealership and distribution network in the entire state of Arizona, and he works there.
So it's a close family.
It's one big happy. Yeah,
Very
one
cool.
big happy family.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, hi.
Hi. Somewhat related to your comment about his encyclopedic knowledge of the former USSR. I first encountered John McCain when he sponsored a seminar set of speeches by Wole Soyinka from Nigeria during the period when Soyinka was in exile by the horrible dictators that were ruining that country. I was shocked. I said, I wonder why McCain this is a different kind of Republican. This is a different kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
But he sponsored that, and he was very involved. What, do you have any sense of his involvement with Africa and Nigeria in specific?
Not specifically Nigeria, but I will tell you that he spent a tremendous amount of time traveling to countries all over the world, being, for lack of a better way to describe it, an ambassador for democracy. He nourished those Eastern European republics as they became independent and learned about democracy and tried to instill in them some idea of what democracy should look like. My guess is he did the same thing in African countries as well. He never spent a congressional recess anywhere but on the road. He was always visiting troops for Christmas. He was never home, much to his children and his wife's dismay. And he spent a tremendous amount of time talking, bringing, studying, spreading, if you will, democracy around the world. A different kind of operation for sure. Yeah, definitely. Oh, people are making their way to the microphones.
Thank you, Elaine. What his? I mean, obviously he had the thumbs down presentation or decision on the ACA Affordable Care Act. What other kind of elucidation can you give us about his feelings toward Trump?
Can't stand the man. See, but what I understand about it is that his entire life has been, as he says so often, doing something greater than your own self-interest. And he looks at the president and sees complete self-interest. He doesn't see that at all. And since he's tried to live his life by a tenet of doing something greater than self-interest, it's no wonder that he sees the president as something antithetical to almost everything he believes. And yeah, he speaks off the cuff just like the president does, and he says nasty stuff from time to time, but he doesn't really mean it. And he's never demeaned anyone personally. There was a situation in one of those New Hampshire town halls that I talk about where a woman started talking about Obama when he was running against Obama for president, and he talked, and this woman was like, he's a Muslim, he's not born in the United States, and he took the microphone back from her and said, no ma'am, he's an American, he's a patriot, we just happen to disagree. So if you think of it that way, you can understand why he has an antipathy for the president. You know, he said he didn't want him to speak at his funeral. That's pretty deep. That is pretty deep. Uh-oh, I am in deep trouble now. The estimable Ron Cohen has arrived.
No trouble. Just want to know if is McCain still bitter at all about the character assassinations by the Bush people in 2000?
You know, he, as I said previously, he really doesn't hold a grudge, tries not to. That one was very tough because it involved his adopted daughter, Bridget. And if you don't know, they spread rumors in South Carolina that she was the illegitimate child of him and somebody else and whatever. It's made terrible things about her. And that one was very, very hard for him. You know, he patched it up for show with Bush in 2000. They were never close. Since then, I think, you know, there has been some mellowing, and I think Bush at some point talked to him about it, and they did reach some accommodation. But that one was very tough for him. And, you know, it's family, right? I just went through the 7 kids. The children of the first wife work for the second. We're family. And of course that goes for Bridget as well. So I think that'll be a tough one for him. But he didn't say they didn't want George W. Bush to speak at his funeral. So we know where that is. Yes, sir.
Could you speculate on why he voted to sustain affordable health care? Would that have upset his voters? Didn't he campaign against it?
I think he did that because 2 things. I think he did it because he didn't see an alternative to what they were doing, and the idea of decimating the Affordable Health Act without doing something to replace it so that all of those people who had gotten health insurance under that plan would not be left alone bothered him. That, I think, was the part that was the hard, the thing that sort of pushed him over the edge. And in fact, I showed you the picture of him with the senators. He believes in the Senate working, and he did not see that happening at that point. There was no compromise. There was no negotiation. There was no committee process. There was nothing. And those 2 things, I think, combined to have him basically to them.
It certainly upset President Trump. He talks about it a lot on the speech trail now, even now.
Well, that might have been a side benefit, you know? That might have been something a little extra. So, yeah. Uh-oh. I'm in serious trouble now.
Hi, Elaine.
Hi, Chuck.
You talked about his honor, and you talked about sort of, his sense of purpose and his judgment and whatever. How do you explain the Keating Five in that context? Was that just an error in judgment? Was there something more going on at the time? And how did he sort of come out of that, you think?
It was a huge error in judgment. He made the mistake of thinking that people who donated to his campaign were his friends. And it turned out they were not. And he went to a meeting he never should have gone to. He took gifts and trips and all kinds of things from this big campaign donor that he never should have done. He was blinded, I think, by the power that he had. And partially that, and also there was some legitimacy to trying to help out a business in his state. That's where it all started. That's what senators are supposed to do. They're supposed to help out people in their state. But he got way out of line and took money and took gifts and took trips, and his family rode on Keating's plane, and it was a disaster. And he got rightly brought up before the Senate Ethics Committee on that charge. He was not as deeply involved as some of the others, but he was involved. Warren Rudman, former Senator Rudman from New Hampshire, wrote in his book that he really wanted to exclude McCain, but he couldn't because that wouldn't have felt right with all the other people who were in it. So he got a slap on the wrist for what he did, but it really hurt him. I mean, he said that it was worse than anything that had ever happened to him in his life. I find that hard to believe, knowing what had happened to him in his life. But to him, having his honor tarnished like that was truly devastating. He thought about quitting the Senate. He thought about doing all kinds of things, which he kept getting talked out of. But that one really, really hurt. And of course, the entire basis of his campaign thereafter was the McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform that was a direct outgrowth of what had happened to him in the Keating Five. He had seen how people can get corrupted by the money, and he wanted to do something about it. I really appreciate everybody coming out to hear this talk. I understand they're hiding the books behind the counter in the front, so if anybody would like to get one, I'm happy to sign them. And thank you again for being here today.